That's all. That's
Yeah.
really to bounce off what you're saying.
And so, I think a lot of people who'll be watching this webinar will also be thinking about the wider world of EMI, and there are conversations around proficiency, language level, testing, that are very often raised, so maybe it would be interesting for us to discuss that as well. I'll start with Tom, if that's all right, Tom, because you have the largest student body in France. So you have lots and lots of students. I'd like to know how many, actually, because I know it's a lot. And when you told me that you were the largest French university, I went and checked that up, and I was like, oh my goodness, yes, they are the largest French university. So yeah, you have a massive student body. What's the conversation on proficiency, language proficiency,
So I hear you talking about and meeting colleagues in the canteen and things like this. These concepts, obviously, when there are 80,000 students, there are hundreds of canteens and and so the reality is that, and I noted, minimum overseas internships and things like this. They have to do at least one. Okay, we have I think it's about 5% of our students actually go anywhere at any stage.
Okay. Yeah.
Which anywhere could be Toulon if you're living in Marseille. All right, so it's it's a completely different world. It's a different reality. In terms of language competence, well, we're at 40% are A2 B1 when they arrive in first year, and they're about A2 B1 when they leave, because we have so few hours. And then there's the 10% that aren't, and that are B2 when they arrive and B2 C1 when they leave. And so I think when you talk about language, unfortunately, when you talk about language skills in universities, then you will be talking about exclusion, and social inequalities, because the category of students that come into universities and that are on the top already, they will stay on the top, and they will have access to these EMIs. They will have access to Erasmus programs. They will have access to other exchange programs, and so their level. So that I think that the level will increase, and so in terms of language provision, the university, the overall picture in universities is fairly dramatic, and the recent government announcements are not going to help. So we have to carry on encouraging and saying, you should really work on your English, because it'll give you access to. But I was in a meeting earlier on this morning. We were talking about access to masters, so science masters. And most of, in fact, I don't know if anybody here is outside the French context. I don't think so, but maybe. But when we talk about masters in universities, we're talking about the similar level to what you engineering schools refer to. So basically, all your programs are graduate programs, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so our master's students, there's a big leap from undergraduates, so the degree programs, to the graduate programs, and that's where the selection process takes place. And now the selection process is basically it's a B2 in English, or you won't get in. And for some of the fully English masters, they are actually asking for some form of certification. That's a problem as well, but we're not here to talk about certification in English. But that will usually be TOEIC. And so this level of language ability is actually influencing the ability of some students who are strong in sciences to go on. And there are no more hours. The money is going into the prestigious programs and not going into the undergraduate programs, where they would need more hours to actually achieve a kind of depressing picture I'm painting here. All I can say is that it's not any better in the language faculties. There's one difference, is that at least in the science faculties, they learn some science. But could we talk about French At some stage? And how French is taught? Anybody here a teacher of French? Because it would be interesting to see. I mean, I do have some issues with the way French is taught as a foreign language in France. So it'd be interesting to maybe talk about that slightly. But so yeah, coming back to this the overall language level problem is a huge issue in the universities. But we have the Chinese approach, which is there are 80,000 of us. So if only 5% get through, it doesn't matter.
Okay, it is a little bit depressing, but it's very, very important to have these conversations, I think, because, it's, when I introduced the three of you, you all work at, the highest possible level of language policy. And even we are not the decision makers, are we? And so I think that's the really interesting takeaway, because from the outside, because what we do all have in common is that we all work for the state, and we are not private language schools. We're not, we don't just like wake up one day and decide, oh, I want to change this and do that, and I'll just have a quick board meeting with my people and say, okay, we're going to do this. That's absolutely not the reality within which we work. And one of my favorite EMI quotes, I really hesitated to share this because it's quite a political quote, but we've gone there, is Gert Biester, who talks about the politics of learning. And very often these political problems that we have in EMI contexts across the world, a colleague of mine in Egypt has the same problem. It's the political problems suddenly gets transposed into learning problems. And it becomes the responsibility of the teachers in the classroom to deal with problems that are entirely outside their scope and have nothing to do with how they would like to teach, or how they, their vision of what pedagogy is. So pedagogy is a political thing, pedagogy is and you mentioned French, Tom, but I think the same conversation could be had for Spanish or Portuguese or Arabic, or, there's what kind of a contrast are EMI practices creating with local language instruction, local language policies? These are difficult questions to even ask, let alone answer, let alone find solutions to, but I do think they need to be asked as much as possible.
Yeah, maybe I could just.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom. Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm actually quite relieved, because my context is less depressing than what Tom has painted at the university. I'm joking, but I mean, we do have those kind of the body responsible for delivering the engineering degree, right? So what we call it, the CTI in France, in case we have non-French
people who'll be watching the video, yeah.
The video. I mean, they do have a requirement both for English and for French. So, for example, the international students arriving, when they arrive in their second year here, when they arrive at the school, there's a minimum level in French that they're supposed to have, right? Which is kind of again A2, B1. They are in order to graduate, so to actually get their double diploma, they have to have like a minimum level in French at the end, which is an overall B2, right? The same in English. The city does require students to have minimum B2, preferred C1 level in some kind of certification. So it's true that we do have these. The CTA, they tell us, we don't really mind which certification you do, right? But it does need to be kind of validated. And from personal experience, I know that our French students who want to go study on programs abroad, in different countries, where we have partnerships, depending on the specific partnership, they will require or not an external certification. So if it's a partnership with a specific university in Madrid, for example, where the courses will be in English, a simple, certificate signed by me as head of department saying, yes, this person definitely has the level they require to follow a course being taught in English. But that's not the same if they want to go to Imperial College, for example. Right. So there is this kind of the city is saying yes, no problem. Do whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if they want to get that piece of paper at the end, they have to prove their language levels.
Julie, do you want to react on that, because you're the one who manages this for us, you know?
Yes, and that situation has evolved dramatically since I started working with sending students to the UK. I mean, I don't know if relatively recent events have affected that, probably. They are much less flexible on English results. I mean, some of our students are absolutely brilliant scientists who the departments in Cambridge, Oxford and Imperial are very keen to get, but the language services in those universities have such power that even a letter from me saying, look, I can manage perfectly well, is absolutely not sufficient. Even a certificate from the professor in charge of that particular master's or PhD is not enough. They absolutely have to get those language. There's one small thing they can do, small, is pay a huge amount of money to go to that particular university language service for a month. And even then they don't guarantee that they will get the language certificate at the end. Of course, they inevitably do, but it's become quite the tool. And there are students that we have literally had a brilliant student who didn't manage to do, we have a year exchange agreement. Well, he didn't get onto that year exchange agreement because he didn't get the Cambridge language requirement. Even though we had selected a student very high level who managed perfectly well in the interview, he just maybe wasn't good at the test on that day. So I have I don't know if mixed or strong feelings on these language tests. I mean, we also have an in-house test that we use, obviously, to have level groups, which every year we struggle with brilliant students students who are fluent in English who don't manage, and then students who end up being tutors who can barely string a sentence together. They are the exception, but it happens every single year. So I don't have a lot of faith. Maybe that's putting it a bit bluntly. I have some reservations.
It went up and then it came back down again.
No,
some reservations.
I have some reservations.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
could I come back to the
Yeah.
policy making
Yes.
question? I think that we also have to. I mean, I don't know. I've painted a fairly dark picture of university life, but at least our senior university management, they're saying the right things. They just the real choices, that the real budgetary choices are being made at a higher level, which means Paris, obviously, at a ministerial level. And all we can ask, I guess, all that we can ask at our level is that they make the right statements in the right direction, so that one day, if we do have the money, then we'll be ready to react and to do things with it. So at least a little bit less critical of our university management and more critical of national policy and the way that university education is organized, which is obviously an issue. If you remember, about an hour ago, I said English with a small e. So maybe EMI should be, English with a small e and a capital I, because these language departments in the UK that are saying a student can't come, they're forgetting that the students coming for the science or the humanities or whatever, and that English is just a medium of instruction, not the instruction.
Absolutely.
And so,
Exactly.
And this is also the message that we give our teachers who are going to be teaching in English. We don't know more than them. Okay, all right. It's your speciality. Okay, so you'll find a way to explain it, right? And maybe it'll take you a wee bit longer because you're doing it in English and not in French. But let's not forget that the big picture is that they're instructing in something, in science or in engineering or in whatever, and so restoring the academic importance of EMI, and diminishing the linguistic importance maybe of it in certain contexts.
I'm going to make t-shirts with Tom's
perhaps take the pressure off that would take the pressure off some of the French students who feel that they have to be really good in English in order to benefit from it. No, because you're really good in science. And you're so good in science that you'll actually be able to follow, even if your English is crap. Okay.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And
But I think-
science is an international language as well, right? I mean, it's not like you're teaching sort of medieval history, French history in English. It's they've got the formulae and the images and the experiments and the practicals, which
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
it's already
is a
mediated
language in
different
itself, right?
Exactly. They're already mediating, different, I mean, they're already doing a lot in English anyway, right? A lot of the literature when they're reading, like the recent publications, it's in English anyway. And I think that it's quite interesting to think that a lot of the research today about, translanguaging. I mean, I remember when I was studying to become an English teacher, we were taught to, no English no French in the classroom, so you're in your English class and only English, please. And I did that, right, for years. I kind of hounded people for speaking in French. Whereas more recent research today, it's more about the translanguaging, and that's what happens in real life, right? Is like using your linguistic competencies in different languages to get different things done. And so I really agree with Tom that the capital E on English as a medium of instruction, maybe we should kind of make it a little bit smaller. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but it means that there are other options out there.
Yeah, and I think, first of all, Tom, we're absolutely going to make a few T-shirts with your quotes. EMI with a big E, EMI with a big I. It's awesome. But I think also, translanguaging, pragmatic skills, and learning to approaching the world of translation not as this sort of mechanistic, word for word, software dominated world. Translation is actually one of the most profound human experiences of trying to understand another person and take something away from it and reformulate it into something that's our own, and we have forgotten how to really translate because I would say because of an overdependence on software, but translation is actually this very beautiful, highly communicative act that we all engage in every day, whether it's talking to our pet dog or talking to somebody from a completely different industry. We're constantly translating, and I think it's an art that we're losing. I think people know how to do it less and less, and I think that it's important to kind of keep those skills alive as well. And so then we come into conversations about navigating EMI environments, being able to have the right sort of code switching skills, being able to measure the impacts of what you're saying and what sort of what kind of language you're using and how that's going to affect the other person, etc. And to absolutely, without meaning to end on a low note, but one of the other things that Julie and I have had to deal with loads is criticism that EMI practitioners receive when they teach in English, and it is absolutely not a question of ego, but it's a question of degradation of academic expertise, perceived academic expertise. And this is really, really difficult to manage, and I think probably expectations management is the best way to conclude this webinar. And it's how do we have the conversation? How do we manage expectations for people coming into the process? Thoughts?
Students and teachers, actually, because it's students go into the classroom with expectations in terms of what what they expect their teacher to do and how well their teacher will do that in English or not or in French. I think that what's interesting as well is it's actually something that's related. I'm going to go off topic, but I'll come back. It was just I wanted to share something about student expectations in terms of their teachers. We were talking before about the mix in a classroom with so maybe French students or native speaker students or other international students. And again, this is a real life story experienced a few weeks ago. Where I had an international student come to see me who was very upset because they'd been given some feedback in a very perhaps less constructive way than I would do it myself. And they were like really, they were really upset. I mean, they were very surprised in the way that this feedback had been given because they felt that it was more critical than constructive, right? And it was very interesting because the same week I had another student come to see me and say, well, actually, please don't tell me what I'm doing well. I'm not interested. Just tell me what I'm doing wrong, because I just want to get better. And it was Yeah, like, I thought, wow, you know, two very different perspectives. But you know, that's the reality, right? Like in any classroom, is you have multiple expectations, and we're dealing, and that in the EMI classroom, I mean, in any classroom actually, but in the EMI classroom, you're dealing with all of those things.
Absolutely. Concluding thoughts, Tom, Judy?
So I guess to come back, I think we you know we have to remain optimistic, because EMI is an excuse for talking pedagogy, and I think that in any situation, just sitting down and thinking about the way that you are teaching anything is a good thing, be it in English or in any other context. So basically, the existence of webinars like this is a very positive thing. There's an awful lot of work to do, but that's exciting, isn't it? Because some of you are younger than me and you need a job for a long time, so that's cool. All right, and sorry, I'm looking at the pictures. All of you are younger than me, so sorry.
I don't think so.
Except the ones whose cameras are not on, and I can't tell. So there you are. So there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work in languages, but there's a lot of work in EMI, and there's a lot of work in pedagogy and in teacher training in general. And so thanks for organising this, and thanks for all the good work that you're doing for French academia and French higher education.
Great.
It's all about the people, isn't it? I mean, that's basically what we're all saying. I mean, the tricky students, the oversensitive teachers, you know, the gung-ho people like us talking about shared practice and with really doing our best and then getting constantly discouraged. But overall, I think it's important. I mean, it's all about trust and communication and interculturality and going against the grain of what's going on in the world today. On the contrary, embracing difference and just accepting that there's some ways to communicate that are just a bit more pragmatic than others, and demystifying the whole process is always the way I like to approach things.
Yes.
Not very good at mystifying things.
Yes.
At my great age.
So yes, as Alexandra's just mentioned in the chat, the replay of this webinar will be available on YouTube in small chunks. And thank you very, very much to our wonderful speakers. And that's it from us. So our next webinar will be on intercultural stories in late May, early June. So keep a lookout for that via social media pages. And we wish you all a lovely afternoon. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.